Hello everybody, this is a video talking about how to be a presiding officer for student congressional debate. We're going to be going over a lot of content within this, and I'm going to be splitting it up into a couple different videos. Eventually there will likely be a very in-depth version of how to be a presiding officer that has multiple videos going into each different concept. So precedence recency, how to run an amendment, what to do with a motion to reconsider, any type of objections, different types of courtesies, weird and random happenings, stuff like that. But within this video, we are very much just going over the basics. So these are the things that happen in every single round of congressional debate that you need to be aware of. First, we're going to be going over what a presiding officer is, and then parliamentary procedure. Then we'll be looking at how to run a chamber in 3 different sections. The first section is everything before debate begins. The second is during debate. And finally, we're going to be going over how to close a chamber. I do have resources available. Reach out to me if you want them. Go onto the website as well, howtocongress.com. If you are a coach or captain who have a team and want me to come and speak to your kiddos about how to be a presiding officer and be able to answer any questions, stuff like that, that's part of what the company does. I am available for hire to teach lessons, give lectures, stuff like that. So just let me know what you need. You're able to contact me through any of the stuff in the description, and I will come and virtually give you guys a lesson. Something to keep in mind before we get into the video: 2 types of chambers. First, in person, second, online. Online chambers are a result of COVID, but a very positive result. They have increased accessibility for Congress, made it more possible for people to attend national circuit tournaments, and lowered the cost of travel, hotels, time off work for parents, stuff like that. But a lot of stuff that happened with online chambers kind of developed slowly and regionally, and then once people were online all together at national circuit tournaments, there are kind of some like common ways of running a chamber that became dominant, and some of those carried over into in-person chambers once those started opening up again. I'm giving you a warning that this video is made in February of 2023. If you are too much further in the future than 2023, it may not be entirely true, everything that I'm talking about with common courtesies online and in-person tournaments. Generally, parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order are going to stay the same. The role of a presiding officer will stay the same. Just be sure to check the rule books and everything to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information possible. So, without any further ado, what is parliamentary procedure? So, parliamentary procedure is the backbone of congressional debate. It's the set of rules depicting the manner and order in which a congressional chamber is run. Parliamentary procedure determines the setting of the agenda, speaking and questioning order, member recognition, motions, points of privilege, and voting procedure, and it accounts for what to do. When something goes wrong, you follow Robert's Rules of Order. So if parliamentary procedure isn't explaining objections, motions to reconsider, stuff that is a little bit weird and wacky for a typical session, you're going to be going into Robert's Rules. And if you are a new PO and you don't know what to do, ask your parliamentarian. They should be very aware of what to do, and if they don't, they reach out to Tab Room is able to tell them, or tabulation staff is able to tell them what it is that they're doing, and you'll get help regardless. So even if you don't have all of parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules of Order memorized by the time that you walk into your first session, you have the parliamentarian to back you up. Speaking of which, who are the parliamentarian and presiding officer? So parliamentarian is an adult. They are not a competitor, but they should be well-versed in Robert's Rules of Order and congressional debate. The presiding officer, also called PO, Chair, President, Madam Chair, is the elected student member of the chamber tasked with upholding parliamentary procedure and keeping the chamber running. Your job as a PO is to be efficient, move through motions and orders of business in such a way that the chamber is aware of what you're doing and understands why you're making your calls in the way that you are doing them, but is not so quick that you're jumping over certain things. So it's kind of a bit of a balance. They are competing against the speaking members, but off of different criteria. So while speaking members are being judged and scored on a speech-by-speech basis and going over their contentions and rebuttal and weighing structure and everything like that, the PO, instead of being judged on these things, is judged on efficiency, how well they are upholding decorum, if they're able to handle the chamber when things are going wrong, how often they make mistakes, stuff like that. All right, so that was your parliamentarian, presiding officer, and parliamentary procedure. They all work together. Parliamentarian and the PO should both know Parliamentary Procedure and Robert's Rules of Order. For the first couple times that you are presiding, you probably won't really be expected to have it memorized. If you can have it in front of you on a computer, fantastic. Just try and be aware of the main things. So how to transition from one speaker to the next, how to open a floor, all of that kind of stuff. We'll be going over it in a sec. I always break up explaining presiding into 3 sections: before the chamber, during debate, and then closing the session. Before the chamber is going to be your lobbying and caucusing, getting all of the things ready that you need to, because there are some things that you need to have prepared before you sit down, your election speech or nomination speech, and your housekeeping speech. These 4 different things are going to happen in every single tournament. So it's important to be aware of them. First things first, caucusing and lobbying. Caucusing and lobbying, used interchangeably. Some people call caucusing, some people call lobbying, is different online or in person. If you're online, it's going to be very short because it's only the amount of time that you are available to be within the virtual room. If you are in person, it's in the halls and the cafeteria and randomly to other people who you know are going to be within your chamber and you've seen before. Regardless, in this time, you're talking about potential agenda nominations and then whoever wants to run for PO. If you're considering running for PO, you need to find someone within your chamber who is going to nominate you. At the very beginning of the session, the parliamentarian is going to ask for presiding officer nominations, and someone needs to stand on your behalf and nominate you. And if you don't get nominated, you're not going to be the PO. So at least get one person to stand for you. Ask 2 so that if the first person forgets, the second one remembers. But you do need to be nominated, and self-nominating, while it is possible, doesn't look as good. It's better to have someone else vouch for you than it is to say that no one has /can/would. You know, get someone else to nominate you. When you are lobbying, you also want to be aware of the agenda, even if you are planning to preside, because if you're not elected for presiding officer, you should still be giving speeches. Before you walk into your chamber, whether this is like before or after the lobbying section, you want to be aware of any tournament-specific rules. You want to, if you can, get a preset recency sheet. So if the tournament supplies one, fantastic. If it doesn't, I always suggest putting the last names into like a randomizer online and then getting a random order for the preset recency. You also should have a seating chart if you know what the room is going to look like. And then if you can get Parliamentary Procedure and Robert's Rules handbooks pulled up on your computer or downloaded onto your computer, fantastic. You're even more prepared. Once you get into your session, your parliamentarian is going to open the floor for presiding officer nominations. At this time, the 2 people who you asked to nominate you are going to rise. So the parliamentarian will say something along the lines of, I am now opening the floor for presiding officer nominations. All those with such nominations, please indicate or rise at this time. Then the 2 people nominating you will raise their hands or placards. The parliamentarian will call on them, and then they will say, I nominate Representative Smith. Then me, Representative Smith, will say, I humbly and graciously accept. Some people just say humbly, or some people just say I accept, but the fancy decorous people say I humbly and graciously accept. And then after you've accepted that nomination, if you are the only person nominated, congratulations, you're the presiding officer. If there are multiple people, you have to give a nomination speech. So in the reverse order of nomination, the parliamentarian is going to ask for a 30-second to 1-minute speech going over your experience and efficiency and fairness and all of that kind of stuff. Within your nomination speech, you generally want to say your name, your district, so where you are from or your school, whatever, and then any experience that you have, say that you are fair and efficient and willing to help the chamber run, and that you are really looking forward to serving for the chamber this session. Remember that you're trying to get them to vote for you, so during that caucusing period, if you can let people know that you're running, fantastic. If you can get some people to say that they would vote for you, that's even better. If you lose the election, remember you should speak. And then if you are elected, so parliamentarian runs the voting procedure, it's a straw poll or written or however they run the election, you are elected, then the next thing you need to do is move up to the front of the room next to the parliamentarian if you're in person, or directly go into your housekeeping speech if you're online. After you're at the front of the room in person, or at this point online, you go over your housekeeping. And this is just generally your timing procedures, how speakers should be recognized, and tech policies. For a full summary of an effective housekeeping speech, look up in the air. You're going to be introducing yourself and your school, and then going over your timing for speeches and questions. Remember, when you are going over your timing, you want to show what your timing is going to look like. So say you're in person, you on the table in front of you with your gavel are going to say, during your speech, I will be giving time signals throughout. At 2 minutes, you'll have 1 gavel tap. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, you will have 2 gavel taps. And at 2:55, you will have 3 gavel taps. At 3 minutes, I will rise and gavel you down until 3:10, at which point you will be inaudible. What that means is that from 3 minutes, the point that you stand, to 3:10, you're going to be tapping, getting louder and louder and louder until they cannot be heard. Remember that you're carrying a wooden hammer and that you have the ability to be very loud, but that the goal is not to be deafening. The presiding officer should not be banging on the table with the gavel as hard as they can, just loud enough to remind the speaker that they should be wrapping up. This is grace period, and once they've hit the extension of grace, they're kind of out of luck. It's just thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Any and all questioners, please rise. At that time, or at the end of the speech, make sure that you announce the time for the judges. So thank you, representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 45 seconds. At this time, all questioners, please rise. If you have direct or indirect questioning, make sure that the timing procedure is clear for both of those. Indirect, those are the popcorn questions, so the traditional questions. It's just one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And you can just point at people if they have the next question, or you can just say their last name. If it's direct questioning blocks, then generally you want to do it a little bit differently. For those 30-second blocks, you are going to do 1 gavel tap at 20 seconds elapsed and 2 gavel taps at 30 seconds elapsed. For direct questioning blocks, they're generally based off precedence recency. Check the rules, be aware of what you should be basing them off of, and then stay consistent throughout the sessions. If there are tournament rules, if you're defaulting to NSDA, NCFLs, whatever it might be, just read the rules for what you're supposed to be doing at the time that you are debating and doing your tournament. Also be aware that some tournaments have final appeal speeches. These are becoming more common, especially on the national circuit. So final appeals happen and are triggered by a motion to move previous question on a piece of legislation. After that 2/3 vote has been passed, you are automatically going into a final appeal. That is a 90-second speech by the author or sponsor of the legislation, at which time they are able to wrap up the debate. For final appeals, it is 1 tap at 30 seconds, 2 taps at 60 seconds, 3 taps at 125, because they are 90-second speeches. You also want to go over your procedure for technical difficulties. Yes, you need a plan. And then ask the judges for their paradigms. They should be on tab room, but sometimes judges want to say something before the round gets started, so give them an opportunity to do so. If you are online, a lot of times pronouns will be included. If for whatever reason they're not included, you can always ask for pronouns when you're going over the roster, just to make sure that everyone is present and going down the list of names. And then when you're going down that list of names, ask people to correct you if you're pronouncing it incorrectly. There's a lot of last names that you will never have seen before, so if you're saying it incorrectly, that's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to adjust how you are saying it in order to properly address them. And then finally, just ask any questions from the chamber. Okay, that was a lot of information. That was everything that you need to know before the chamber gets started. So caucusing, lobbying, all the things you have to have prepared, election speech, nomination speech, they're synonymous, it's the same thing, and then housekeeping. When you are running a chamber, be confident, make a call, back it up. Your presiding is going to change depending on your parliamentarian, so if they're overbearing, deferring to them will make them favor you. If they're hands off, only ask them questions if you really need something. If they're inexperienced, you're going to get away with murder. And also be aware that your judges might know how to preside or be a parliamentarian. That was a lot of information. We are going to keep going. I am not going to go over precedence and recency within this video. That will be a separate video just because I want to run through some examples, and that within itself is going to take 10 minutes. But the thing that you need to know is that precedence is the number of speeches that have been given, and recency is the order in which those speeches have been given. When you're doing questions and speeches, the precedence and recency for questions and precedence recency for speeches are tracked separately. So the number of questions someone's asked does not determine their speaking order. Remember that PR are used when deciding the member of the chamber who will next have the floor and used to ensure equitability between chamber members, and tournaments will occasionally have preset recency in order to ensure fairness in the selection of speakers from the get-go. So if there is preset recency, ask the parliamentarian, make sure that you have it before you start calling on speakers. If there's no preset recency, I always encourage just using a random generator for last name order, but the idea is to not set a pattern. So you don't want to pick all people of one gender, or all people from one side of the room, or all people from one school, anything like that. Just don't let a pattern establish. Okay, so you have been elected. You gave your housekeeping speech, you went over all the questions that came up, you've done roll call, parliamentarian is all sat and ready, no more questions from the chamber or judges. What do? It is your job to open the floor for agenda nominations and to start getting through the legislative items. The way that you do that is by opening the floor for agenda nominations and asking for nominations. Once nominations come up from the chamber, then you choose them in whatever random order and write them down in the order that they tell you. If you are in the first session of like a 3-session prelims, it's a great idea just to set the full 3-session agenda so that people in the recesses and breaks know what's coming up next and are able to prepare. Along that same line, please make sure that you have sponsorships or authorships for cycle affirmative and negatives for the legislation that you are putting preferentially on the agenda. So any higher things should have first cycles prepared for them. You talked about that during caucusing, but just it's really embarrassing to open up an agenda and then no one's ready for the first item. Once you have all of your agenda nominations, so you choose each speaker who wants to nominate an agenda, then you're going to vote on them. And you do need a majority for the agenda. So whatever agenda gets a majority of the members present, fantastic. If there's none, you're going to need to do voting a couple times. Once you have that agenda set, then you are going to need to open up debate on the first legislative item by calling for an author. Remember, as the PO, it's also your job to make sure that your judges know exactly what you're talking about. So when that first agenda is elected and you know what you're going to be doing for the round and you get to the first legislative item, then you are going to say, Representatives, we are now in line to open debate on our first legislative item, P2, a bill to raise the federal minimum wage. At that point, the judges are going to go through their docket. They're going to find P2. They're going to see the title. They might skim the legislation if they hadn't read it before. And they have the legislation in front of them now that you guys are going to be debating. If you don't clearly announce the legislative title, or you just use an abbreviation like minimum wage, it might be harder for the judges to find what you're talking about. And if they don't know what you're debating, they're not going to be able to give a lot of good feedback and context because they just don't know what you're debating. So be very clear with what you are talking about, especially with parent judges. If you need to send out the docket, great option as well. You can do that online. Some chambers start by reading legislation. If that's common on your circuit, great. If you're on the national circuit, it usually doesn't happen. So be aware that you just don't really do that in some places and you do it in others. Once you have the first legislative item open, you are calling for an author first. Remember, that's the person who wrote the legislation. And then if no author is standing or present, then you need a sponsorship. The author and the sponsor functionally do the same thing. They're introducing the legislation and they are acting as the first affirmative speech. There's no such thing as a first half, like it's just author or sponsor. If no one is standing for an authorship and no one is standing for a sponsorship and someone says that they have a first affirmative and they don't know it's the same as a sponsorship, let them give it. Awesome. They're giving a speech in the affirmation. That's all that they need to do. So yeah, that's how the first piece of debate is opened. At the first word of the member speaking within the chamber, so the person on the floor, you start your timer. 2 minutes elapsed. Remember, you're either gaveling or doing time cards. After that point, Once they have hit the end of their speech, you say, "Thank you, representative. Speech time, 2 minutes and 52 seconds. Any and all questioners, please rise for a 2-minute questioning period." 2 minutes first cycle, 1 minute thereafter. Whenever you are working on a piece of legislation, you're just going afneg, calling back and forth, tracking off of precedence and recency for the order of speakers and questioners. This part of the debate goes fairly quickly. So for the PO, it's easy, especially for that first legislative item, because everyone's just going to speak once and you kind of just pick off of the preset recency. But yeah, that's what you're doing. You're just picking affirmative, negative, affirmative, negative, affirmative, negative. And if for whatever reason there's no one standing for one side of the debate, then call again. So at this time, we are seeking a speech in the negation. Any and all negative speakers, please rise. Pause. Once again, we are seeking a speech in the negation. Any and all negative speakers, please rise at this time. Pause. Seeing and hearing no indication of a speaker on the negation, we are now forced to break cycle. Although the chair does highly frown on one-sided debate, it is necessary to keep the debate moving. At this time, we are now calling for speakers in the affirmation. So that's how you switch. So no one is standing in the negation, call for the affirmation instead. If anyone stands on the affirmation, fantastic. The next speech that you call, again, is in the negation. If you have broken cycle a couple of times and you've given 3 consecutive speeches on one side, you should be calling for the previous question. So remember, the motion to move previous question is what happens at the very end of any legislative item. There are some pilot rules being spoken about right now where debate must end within 1 hour of a legislative item being opened. So keep in mind that it should be about 1 hour, no more than. At the very end of debate, there's going to be a motion to move to the previous question. That motion is to end debate on a legislative item. Once it's been made in the chamber, so I move to the previous question, you call for a second. If there's a second in the chamber, you call for all those in favor of passing the motion to move previous. You need 2/3 of the members of the chamber to stand for the motion to move previous. And at that point, if you have 2/3 indicating that they want to pass the motion, then you either go on to the final appeal, which common to the circuit, or you go into the voting on the legislation. Nothing else really happens here. If, for whatever reason, there was a member of the chamber who didn't have an opportunity to speak on the legislation, you don't want to pass the motion to move previous question if you can avoid it. If they had an opportunity and didn't use it, and now we're just slowing everything down, and there's another opportunity for them to speak later, like another piece of legislation, maybe let them speak on a different one instead of slowing the motion down here. At the point that the motion's been passed, you're going to call for votes. Remember, bills and resolutions need a simple majority. Constitutional amendments need 2/3 majority in order to pass. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so that's how to run debate. You're calling on speakers and questioners, going off of precedence and recency. Remember, they're tracked separately for speeches and questions, and direct and indirect are tracked differently. Go watch the video on questions. That'll be able to tell you how to do that a little bit more in depth. And then, yeah, that's how to preside during the session and during debate. After you've gotten through the agenda or you've hit the end of time, you're going to need to close the session. If there's another session after, then you don't technically need to adjourn. You can just recess until a set time, so set a time to reconvene. If the parliamentarian is requesting that you adjourn the session, so say that all items have been finished and closed out, you can do that as well. There's going to be a motion from the chamber to adjourn after the motion to move previous question has happened on the last piece of legislation. After that motion to adjourn has been made, you need a second. If there's a second, you need a simple majority. So call all those in favor. If it's unanimous, it's unanimous. If it's not unanimous, then usually something has gone wrong, because if you're at the end of time or the end of the agenda, no one else should want to speak. So generally that's a unanimous vote. That was a lot longer of a video than I intended. I understand that I was speaking quite quickly, and there's going to be a lot more videos on presiding, but those are the basics. Everything that you need to do before the chamber, during the chamber, after the chamber. We talked about what a parliamentarian is, as well as a presiding officer, and parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order. That's everything that you need to know for the very, very basics. So I hope that that was helpful for you. You're going to be seeing a lot more videos. We'll go over some examples of precedence recency, different weird happenings, amendments, stuff like that. But until we get to that video, I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will see you very soon. Bye!